25 minutes. Okay.
Has anybody been on a project where they've been accountable for delivery and just at the last minute of that start, somebody takes 10-15% off your timeline? Can you all just do me a favour? Can you all just stand up just for a second? Everybody. I'm not going to ask you to spell anything, write anything down. Good. And you all sit back down again. It's very important. So I was just demonstrating for John that when I started, everybody was awake. So if anyone is asleep at the end, my name's Steve Edmonton. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I look a lot like one of the other speakers. No. Couple of things, just before I crack on with it. First thing is, I had a look at the attendance sheet when I came in, because it's always really good to understand who's in the room, as well as who can spell and who can't, and that kind of thing. And there's a vast amount of experience in a huge variety of businesses and industries sitting in this room right now. Yeah? I mean, unless you've actually sat there and refused to talk to anybody all day, you'll have encountered people from different walks of life sitting on your table and around about. Yeah? And I think it would be a real pity if we didn't get a bit of a win from that with your help. So there's kind of two things I'd like to invite you to do when we finish, before you go screaming from the room. The first one is, it'd be really helpful to us to do this better. Yeah, I know you're saying, how could that possibly be next time? Could we have your takeaway, your golden nugget from today, your personal thing where you go, somebody famous once said that, if you read a book and you get one thing from that book, it was worth reading. So if you got one thing from today, it will be worthwhile. What I'd like to ask you to do is think about that, not too much while I'm talking. And then the other thing is, we'd like to harvest some of your personal experience, learnings, gotchas, I'm not doing that again, that kind of stuff. So what we've got here, and just use a normal pen to do it, because then we'll get more on, and we'll even more on. We'll give you a second page. Could you write up what the best thing that you got from that, if anything other than the cake was really nice? And also, if you've got a lesson learned, what we'll do is when we publish out the slide packs, we'll put all this on the back. And if you put your name on it, we'll attribute it to you. And if you don't, we won't. And if it's rude, we probably keep it anonymous as well. Anyway, so if you do that, that'd be really good. Would everybody give that a go? Yeah. So just queue up, if anyone's got to rush for a train, they just barge the way to the front and do it first. Okay, that's that. John gave me a bit of an intro this morning, but I always think it's really useful just to get an idea of when you're talking with somebody, or talking at people, or various, whatever, there's a little bit of context so you understand where somebody's come from in terms of what they're talking to you about. Yeah. I had a great one where I was in Houston listening to a guy talking about risk management. I thought, and he stopped at about 3 or 4 minutes and he went, I really should tell you who I am, shouldn't I? Because you were standing there thinking, what the hell? Turns out he was a shuttle pilot, at which point everybody started paying a lot closer attention than they, anyway. So I'm not that glamorous, but I'm an engineer by training. I've got a degree in electrical and mechanical engineering, chartered engineer. I'm a fellow of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers, Institution of Risk Management, and I'm a fellow of the APM. And I've worked in about 6 different sectors: oil and gas, healthcare, food, manufacturing, utilities, charity, anyway, that kind of thing. So I've made a lot of mistakes in a lot of different places, which is, being able to move on and move around is always a really good one. I think John said I'm just finishing building a city about 300 miles from anywhere for a bunch of people. Give you an idea, somebody said, did you have to do a road? We had to lay a brand new A road, I guess it would be, 60 kilometres to join up to the nearest piece of tarmac in any direction. And we had to run a pipeline 35 kilometres to find the nearest usable water source. And that was just raw water, which we then had to put a water treatment plant in to get drinkable water. And we bought our power in from 25, 30 kilometres away, built a 20 megawatt power island of our own in case that one fell over. So mega, mega, mega. I mentioned earlier on that I also had great fun dealing with GPs. They're cuddly when you go to see them, not so much when you renegotiate their contracts, and a few other bits and pieces. So what we do as a Signum group is we try and mask all of our mistakes by calling them lessons learned, you know, things to save you from them, and this would be really helpful if you can contribute back to us. So, right, we're there. That's it, really. Thank you for coming. John already talked about that. It's always quite useful as a project manager to understand at what point you get set free or shot, one or the other. You know, but how far does it extend? Does anybody here close the contract out? Who hasn't? Who's not going to put their hand up, whatever I say, for the next 20 minutes? Okay. There is a scenario of last man standing. You know, last man standing on the deck and the lifeboat, there's quite a bit of water between you. So there's a lot of different scenarios as to what the world can look like at contract closure versus the exciting part of getting going in the first place. Yeah, there's a lot of loss of corporate memory, for want of a better description, team memory on all sides. There's change along the way. There's bound to be change along the way. There's some stuff that you realise you needed partway through. There's some stuff that really wasn't quite so important. There's some stuff that somebody said they thought they were going to get, but it was in a chat in the corridor, or somebody said, oh, I'm not so worried about that, and somebody wrote that down and said it didn't. All that happens on the way, doesn't it? And the time of reckoning is contract closeout. The other thing as well is, anybody here work for a provider of stuff? As in, does anybody here work for a contractor or a provider, somebody on the other side of the fence that will be bidding and doing work? Or are you all not going to put your hand up again?
I have done, but not right now.
Okay. Okay. That was good, because you spoke. You didn't put your hand up, you did speak. Now we've got some. Okay. So one of the things that can happen, particularly with a smart contractor, is they say, well, I was going to use a word I'm not going to because it's on video. They say that all the good presents, CRAP, for the end, and then they kind of go, yeah, now about all this, because they've been keeping an eye on it. All your team have left, and then you're trying to go deal with that at contract closeout. So I would, when I started a job, think that I would plan to be here. It's great if you're kind of only to here, but I'd plan to be the last man or woman standing, and I'd act accordingly. Yeah. So as John said, all the way through, in terms of keeping your, you know, it might be a site diary, it might be an event book, correspondence, communication, all those good things. Yeah. Such that here we go, this is all the evidence. This is why it is, because actually you might go under a bus, figuratively or actually. So you actually owe it to yourself or whoever might follow you on to have that rigour in the management, so that when you get to the closeout, it's not a train wreck. Yeah. This is in the book. Inputs, outputs, pop quiz. This is vaguely more interactive because I've got the death slot, the last 20 minutes when everyone's going, is he going to finish on time so I can get my train? What is super special about this one compared to all the others? Who hasn't got a copy of the book? Because you won't be able to read it from here. Why don't you look next to somebody? Yeah, just got a copy of it. It's a misnomer, right? You've been sold a bum deal. It is not a flowchart, is it? Because it doesn't flow. Because it doesn't have arrows connecting everything. Has anybody noticed that? Was it just me when I was writing this section? I suddenly went, and the reason is, I said about writing, the bloke that like me earlier on went, writing the contract, it's all basics, it's all really straightforward, it's actually not that difficult, right? For this section, it's a real difficult thing to do well. Contract exit. You would think it's like, thank you very much, see you later. It's probably one of the most difficult things you'll do. Because you've got to deal with everything that happens from day one to now. Plus the fact, it doesn't always end, a bit like movies, how you thought it was going to. Because things change along the way. Not only in terms of what you bought versus what you built or whatever, but also your requirements and intentions might change. You might want to extend a contract, terminate a contract, add additional bits in, do something different because of the time it's, over a 3-5 year contract, maybe something is different. And did you provision it or did you not? So if you look at this, there are 4 boxes between the ins and the outs, which is assign resources for contract next thing. And that always happens. That should always happen. Either confirm you've got the resources or assign the resources. But then, are you closing the contract? Thank you very much. Check I've got everything. Goodbye. Or you're handing it over. And that handover could be that you're handing over, you've actually, so for example, I've got a couple of examples further back, but a build something, you could build, all done, then just hand the keys. Or you could be mobilising a service, which is your project bit, to get the whole thing up and running, and then you're handing it to somebody that's going to operate it or receive it, like a clinical service, or an IT service, or an FM service, all these things. Yeah. So what actually is the project, and where does the project stop? Normal operation continue, closure become. It's a bit of a variable, isn't it? So you've got ongoing operations, handover, contract closure. And all I'd really say is that's a really good thing to have a look at, but it will be different for whatever you're doing. Does that make sense? There's no cookie cutter answer for this one, which is why it's not flowchart. I thought somebody left the arrows out, but I thought that was a really good explanation. So the inputs are the outputs from the last section, shockingly, almost like we planned it. Go live or go home. That's really what I was, are you, thank you very much, here are the keys, or, and now we can start to serve burger and chips to everybody. Or now your computer will work, or here's your telephone service, or the fire engine will turn up on time, or the water will come out and tap, whatever. Yeah. And it's really worth thinking at the beginning what happens. Because there's all sorts of factors to consider, isn't there? I might want to extend. I might have to deal with a new provider coming in to change out an old provider. And they might not want to play nicely together. Yeah? What has changed between the beginning and the end that I'll have to roll into that? Yeah? Do I have a comprehensive way of checking what I was supposed to get? Did I get it? Or if I didn't get it, do I have a good strong evidence base as to why that was intentional rather than accidental? All these things to think about. And it's fundamentally different typically between services and things. Build a road, open it. Whereas a service provision is an ongoing thing. Okay. Yeah, build it, leave it. Goodbye, I'm doing some of that. New or modified service contract, that GP one I told you about earlier, same people doing something slightly different, or even the same but under a different contract, or a combination of the two. I told you about bringing water 35 kilometres and then building a water treatment plant, but then if you get the people that built it to operate it, what are the risks with that? Because if they build it and hand it to you, you're going to find out pretty quickly what you've got, good, bad, and different. If they operate it, a bit like a car, isn't it, where they're driving it around for you, yeah. And it's only when you go into wherever they drop you off latest that they dash out and put more coolant in the engine because it's leaking out the bottom, and change the rumbling tyre for a less rumbling one. In other words, you don't have clear visibility of how good or bad the asset is in a lot of cases. And actually, even if you've got build and operate, the other risk that you've got as well is they could take you for the build and they could take you for the operate. If you haven't thought it, because you think, oh, it'd be lovely, they'll do it for me. And actually, they'll turn around and go, well, no, this plant's not very good. And you go, well, hang on a minute, you built it, so it doesn't matter, we're in the operate phase now. Look, it's a lot more expensive. And people will do that to you. I know you wouldn't do it to people, but people will do it to you. So you've got to think about those things up front. Yeah. It's like a bank, isn't it? They take your money. And then when they run out of money, they take more of your money. How does that work? You wouldn't do that to them. Anyway, so begin with the end in mind. So this bit is fairly common sense, isn't it? Address exit whilst preparing contract terms before the contract is signed. And that's two things. What are the issues? That's two things. Engineer. What are the issues? What are the risks? And what are the unknowns? The genuine things that you don't know. Plan your closure handover strategy before you start, based on what you know, but allow room for manoeuvre. Plan B is a polite way of saying that your contractor doing that does that. So what do? You always need a plan for, instead of somebody doing that and they do that, what do you do? And that could be at various stages, couldn't it? So what is your contingency around that? Determine the success criteria for each bit. You know, if you actually get to the end of where you want to be, what does good look like at the end? What do you want it to look like? If you have to punch out part way through, what could that look like? What are the points where you could? And if you want to extend, what do you want from that extension? Consider the provider's perspective. Most contracts work well like rowing boats, when everybody in the boat is pointing in the same direction, rowing vaguely together. Right? So if you can align what they want and what you want, that works really well. And here's a really good example of a contract provision that doesn't really help anybody. LDs. Liquidated damages? Yeah? Why do you think liquidated damages aren't much use? That's not strictly speaking true, but they're not as useful as you would like them to be, as you might imagine them to be. Anybody got any ideas?
I generally find that if you try to put liquidated damages in, they'll find a way to say you may change, so they're not an extension of time.
And they'll put a lot of effort into doing that.
Yes.
Anything else?
They can quite rapidly disincentivise the supplier, depending on what the contract value is and the limit of liability.
And when they max out.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Essentially comes about with the contract failed.
Or, yeah, not got according to plan. Who'd like a really simple one to take away? Hands up if you've ever signed a contract because you really were after some LDs. Nobody wants them. You know, you don't go, I've got this contract, and great, at the end of it, I'm going to get some LDs. Whoa! Not so good. Yeah, they really don't help you, do they? As I said, it's, you know, and it's a bit of a false sense of security in a lot of cases. So think about it from the provider's perspective when you put in LDs as to how you do that, for example, or any other contract provision. That's just a great example. You know, and actually most people that have got into LDs, a lot of the time it's not really that beneficial to anybody because you didn't get what you wanted when you wanted it. Handing over. Here's a really big one. Huge, super huge. It's my little golden nugget for what I'm doing at the moment. Often as a project manager with a contract, you will be handing over your hard work to a customer, internal or external. Yeah? You can almost guarantee that the Fiat 500 you're going to drive up to their door is not the Maserati that since the contract was let, they've convinced themselves they're going to receive. And sometimes actually that you did buy a Maserati. You have come out with a Fiat 500 through, you know, whatever happened on the way. But the point is you generally one of the biggest things to manage is the recipient of the end of your project. That's the most important thing, is that they'll accept it, they'll take it, they'll be happy with it, they'll understand it, they'll operate it properly. For any ongoing liabilities that exist, from as in you have to do this and the other party has to do that, that they will honour those and keep that relationship working. Yeah, because your reputation as a project manager will be murdered not long after you're gone, unless you manage that piece. Super critical. As the provider is generally just trying to get out, from generally speaking, they're trying to do a good job. As somebody said, nobody turns up to do a bad one. They're trying to get out with what they went in to get. And if you structure properly the contract incentives, it's a win-win-win all round. The wild card is the customer. I don't really like those. Yeah, but you signed up for it 3 years ago. I know. So you've got to be really careful on that. So, real recommendation is to put a gateway process in, right? Which is the staged acceptance of where you are, how you're going to get through to handover, closeout, whatever it might be, all the things that you're going to pick up at the various stages, who's going to sign off on them, and what you're trying to do is close down the debate, a chunk at a time. Warranties, we've got warranties, yeah. Here's a list of the warranties, here's the contract, this is what they're liable for, this is what they're, okay. Do we have the service contracts in place? Yeah, because actually the whole thing about closure and handover at half the time, if you took the three parties as you as piggy in the middle, and then a provider on one side, contractor, whatever you want to call it, customer on the other, yeah, don't forget to pay attention to making sure the customer is ready to receive it. We're focused on sorting out the provider, closing the contract, and half the time the heat and light that comes out the back end of it is because they're not ready, the customer, or they don't understand it, or they're not trained, or they don't know what they're doing. Yeah? So you've got to have a go, no-go for the people receiving, as well as the go, no-go for close out on the other end. It's a two-part thing. Okay? Is this vaguely making sense? And are you with me now when I said this wasn't easy like what the other bit was? It's actually quite difficult to do. Because you're working with people as much as you're working with stuff. You've got, I gave you a bunch of letters a long time ago, and some of you wrote down spine, some of you wrote down something completely different. Yeah? And by now, at this point in the afternoon, you're both convinced that whatever you wrote down was right. And that's what this is, except you're up against time pressure, cost pressure, all the rest of it. Smooth handover, that's really what you're after. Walk away with trumpets and that kind of thing. You need the key go-live information in a digestible form, idiot's guide, to the recipients, that also is clear to the people that are doing the handing off. It's a relay race, isn't it? Back to back, hand to hand. If there's any training, you want to get that in nice and early. Documentation for ongoing operations, so it could be operation and maintenance manuals, it could be user guides, it could be whatever it might be. And that wants to be, number one, available, and number two, approved. A clear schedule of obligations for when you step away, then what is left behind. Idiot's guide. Doesn't have to list them all in one place, but it has to give you like an index of, and you'll need to do per section 2, 3.3.2 monthly, quarterly, annually, whatever that might be. Yeah, an abstract is really good. You don't want it to fall over after you left. It was fine when I left, blah, 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 because it sinks quietly. So, is there a pre-planned follow-on contract cycle for that provider, other providers, supporting infrastructure, all that kind of stuff? Because ultimately, unless you personally can see your way all the way through to delivering the benefits management or benefits realisation plan, if you can't follow that through and you're leaving it to other people, what do you think the likelihood of success is? I'll have a lottery ticket. And then the other thing that most people don't do, which is really good if you can, unless you're only ever going to do this once and then you're going to go and do something completely different, never come back to it. Lessons learned after action review. What went well, what went bad. It's great if you're doing, further phases of work. But actually it's just useful so you can do a presentation on it 3 years later. Okay. So in summary, because John has actually taken 3 of my remaining 5 minutes, I've only got 2 left. Plan it properly, right, before you issue the RFP, begin with the end in mind. Right at the beginning. Doesn't have to be brilliant, right? But a rough plan is always going to be better than no plan. Identify your stakeholders. For this bit, that's super, super, super important. When you get to the end, who is going to be there? Who's doing the home run? You're going to be able to give the baton to. Will they be there or will they be doing their shoelaces up? Form a clear plan with those stakeholders, okay, to integrate the component parts of how, because quite often, has anybody had it where actually, I'm going to hand it, you're actually 15 different people that I'm now handing it over, not just the one I thought of. Well, I can't make all the decisions, so they need to be involved. Anybody had that? Yeah, where it's multiple people that you're handing over to. Because they can't just say, yes, thank you very much. People tend to want to have group think on accepting responsibility. So make sure you know who they all are, and make a plan for when they're going to do their bits to bring you to the end on time. Acceptance criteria, yeah? And I talk about the go, no-go to make sure they're ready to hand it over, but the other thing as well is, when you do acceptance criteria, if you're reviewing provision, do it against the contract, it's really good. Yeah, otherwise people make stuff up all the time. And like I said, make sure all stakeholders are clear on the contract obligations, leading up to closure, at closure, and for whatever follows on. And bear in mind, this is almost like a mini project. Brief the team on the plan and ensure the resources are in place. A bit like the other stages.
Right. So, any questions? That's good. Yeah.
I've left you on 3 minutes for what I don't really know what.
No.
Are there any questions on that? So, is everybody still awake? Do I need to stand? I was going to do the stand up thing, but a couple of people just slumped quietly in the seat.
Right, okay.
Just one question actually. I'm interested on, just maybe to dwell on the boring, but the LADs part, I'm interested to know what you see as a good alternative, because I do have experience where that's been a very useful thing to have had. Obviously no one wants to go there, but if, for example, it was basically just a late project, happens often. There's genuine costs to the client for it going late, and that basically they got that, they recouped that money, that loss. It wasn't a penalty as such. I know that's a problem sometimes with LODs, is they're seen as just penalising someone, but when they're a genuine reflection of what the real costs are going to be, I don't. If we hadn't had it, it would have been a bad loss to a client. I don't know what your alternatives are for those suggestions.
I think that's one of those great things of saying they're not very good, but without actually coming up with something that's much better. I guess the point I would make is I wouldn't rely on them for an effective delivery, because if you get to that point, if anything, it's damage limitation, but for a lot of people, LDs actually don't really help you. Because you can't have LDs that outweigh the value of what's been delivered. And an awful lot of contracts, like security guards at the Olympics, is, that contract value, not so much. The impact on the Olympics, pretty enormous. The LDs out the back of that, don't kid yourself that that's going to help you out too much. I think that was really the point. So it's not, don't have them, but don't expect too much from them. What you're far better from, what is probably a much better strategy, I would suggest, is to have a payment structure that is compatible with your schedule and drives the contractor to earn their money and enables them to do so. So, and so a really simple example of that is, it might not occur to you to put 5% on documentation, because you're doing a $150 million job, $7.5 million for some books. Now, it's not because there's $7.5 million worth of books, it's because there's $7.5 million worth of pain in extracting those books. If you don't attach $7.5 million to it. Remediation. You know, pick it all up, clear it all up, go home. Put some money on it. So it's actually more about where do I put my money? And how do I break that down? Because, you know, lots of little carrots.
Yeah.
It's probably better.
Yeah. And all the research shows that positive incentivisation, it's far more likely to produce a successful project than negative incentivisation, i.e. damage. Which actually the research going back concluded, it didn't conclude don't use negative incentive, it was put the emphasis on positive incentive. Yeah, because that's what you want. You want them to achieve good to superior performance, and for a plan to do that, rather than plan on how do we avoid damages, well, we have arguments, we keep records, what they didn't do. Yeah,
Big distraction.
yeah, okay. Right.
In a row.
I have to call it there. So thank you very much, Alastair.